guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, you're welcome. Consider subscribing to my channel if you've not done so already. Thank you so much for always stopping by to watch my video. So in today's video, I will show you how to draft a blazer jacket pattern with a back vent. It's going to be very easy and straight to the point. This jacket will have a shawl collar, is a bit different from the one we drafted earlier, and this was requested by a lovely subscriber. So let's jump straight into the video. As a culture on my channel, I have transferred my bodice pattern into this fresh pattern paper. So we'll be using that to create our jacket pattern. Now, the first thing you want to do is to ensure that you have enough room on the shoulder line and at the bottom, as well as the center front, because we're going to be extending this to create our lapel and to create the collar at the top of that end. So I had to stick another pattern paper on that end just to extend it to have enough room for this pattern. So now we need to modify our bodice pattern to create this jacket. Okay, so the first thing I want to do now is to create my break point. So for this one, it's going to be a double-breasted jacket. So the front is going to be longer than the one we drafted earlier. So for this purpose, I'm using 4 inch. It's actually supposed to be on your bust span line. So if your bust span is 4.5, you can use same figure to derive this extension, but it mustn't be there anyway. You could make it shorter than that. So we're working with 4 inches and we're going to connect that straight to the bottom of this jacket. Now, one thing I want to mention is I want to make this jacket a bit longer than the first one. So we're going to be adding some extension on our bodice pattern. I'm making it with a length of 29 inches. So just measure from your shoulder line to 29 inches, which is the length I'll be working with today. And I'm going to square that to the side. Once you've done that extension, you determine your break point, which could be any point you want. You could be on your bust line, above or below your bust line. Just determine where you want yours to be. So I'm making mine 2 inch above my waistline, and that's where I want my break point to be. So square that up and connect that to the 4 inch extension you added at the front. This will help us to create our lapel. Now, what I want to do next is to draw a straight line from my neckline to the extension I marked. Once this is done, the next thing we want to do is to extend the neckline to create our collar. Okay, so to do this, we need to measure the back neckline of our back pattern. So just place your tape on that point and measure it all around to that point. I got 4 inches. So you're going to apply that 4 inches to this neckline to extend it. Now we need to measure ½ inch below this point. Okay, this is because the neckline at the back is curved, so we don't want it standing straight on that point. So we'll just curve it in by ½ inch and blend that into the neckline. Once that is done, we'll also measure the length of the lapel we want. So for this, you can use 2.5 or 3 inches. This depends on the length of the lapel you want to work with. So I'm going with 3 inches and I'll mark that on this straight line. to connect this end to this lapel, you decide to play with it the way you want. Okay, if you want, you can just make it straight away to that point, or you just curve it slightly into that point, or you could even make like zigzag. It depends on what you want. So it's the opportunity to play with the pattern and get the beauty you want to achieve. So for mine, I'm just curving it in gently. So after creating this lapel, my pattern is almost ready and is taking shape already. So what I need to do now is to create my shoulder darts. So to create the shoulder dart, you need to measure the length of your shoulder. When you measure it, for mine I got 5 inches. So you mark at the midpoint, which is 2.5, and you're going to connect that to the bust line. Then you curve it gently into the dart you have on the bottom of your bust line. Usually, connecting my dart, I usually measure 1 inch below my bust line. If you watched my basic bodies pattern video, you will see how I explained that, because it gives a little room for your bust to sit perfectly in that. Okay, so you just connect that to that point with a curve, then you just blend that in. Then you're going to be extending the dart as well on this point to the bottom of your jacket. Once all of this is done, we're going to go ahead to add our 1/2 inch seam allowance all round. Then at the bottom, we'll add 1 inch hemming allowance. This is optional, as you can just cut on pattern. Then while cutting on fabric, you add your seam allowance. Then on the side, I'm adding 1 inch. So while cutting on fabric, the only place we need to add 1/2 inch seam allowance on is on this dart line. Okay, so just this point where we cut off our dart from, that's where we'll add a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now let's move on to the back pattern where we'll be creating the vent. So I've also transferred my back pattern to my fresh pattern paper to be able to create my back pattern for the jacket. Okay, so now the modifications we need to do on here are not as much as the one for the front pattern. Here we'll need to create our vent for the back, and we'll extend the back to be up to the 29 inch we want our pattern to be. Okay, so I'll just extend the length. So now we need to create our vent for the back bodies. Okay, and to create the vent, I'm measuring 7.5 inches from the bottom upwards. Then I'm going to make a width of 2.5 inches. You just decide how wide and long you want your vent to be. So mine is 8 by 2.5. Okay, so just draw a straight line on that point. Then we'll connect that to the extension for the vent. Now you can decide to connect this straight, just make it straight, but I want to slant mine a little bit into the extension. Okay, so I've created the vents for the back bodies. Okay, so now we're going to also mirror this vent on the other side to create the vent for the lining. You know, the lining, when we sew this, we're going to flip it in, so it will be on one side, so it's important to trace this out on the other side as well. Okay, so and to do this, we need to fold our pattern paper that way from this center back. Then we'll transfer that with our tracing wheel. If you're using a tracing paper, it's going to be much easier for you. So now we're going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance at the back. So we'll also transfer this to the other side of the pattern. So that's our 1/2 inch seam allowance. So transfer the neckline because we want it to mirror on the seam allowance. Okay, so we need to just extend our darts and create our shoulder darts at this point as well. So we'll go ahead to add our 1/2 inch seam allowance all round and 1 inch at the bottom of the pattern. We're going to trace out the lining for our left hand side of our back bodies. This extension we created here will be for the right and left patterns of our back bodies, while this inner vent on that point will be for the left hand side of our lining. So we need to trace out the one for the left hand side of our lining, then we'll now go ahead to cut the pattern, which will be for the other side of the lining and our 2 back bodies. For our left lining, so add seam allowance on the darts. This will be for the side back and this will be for the center back. allowance on that. So this is our side back, and this is the center back. Seam allowance. So this is our center front, and this is our side front. So also add seam allowance to that, okay? I'm writing this because we've added seam allowance all round except on the darts. So when cutting on fabric, we just add our seam allowance to the darts. And on this point as well, seam allowance. Add seam allowance. So this is our pattern, okay? Front and back. Then this is our lining pattern for the left hand side. Now let's go ahead and cut on fabric. So for this jacket, we'll be using our two-piece sleeve. Remember our two-piece sleeve pattern. This is what we're going to use for this project. If you've not seen this video, I'll link it in description. You can just have a look at it after watching this video. For the lining, and it will just be one piece, just one piece of this. So we have two pieces of this, so just cut that on lining. Then on the center front as well, we need to cut facing, and facing has to be the fabric you want to be showing in front of your collar. Next, we're going to be sewing this pattern. You know, it's quite tricky doing the vent at the back, but I will guide you step by step on how to sew it carefully and neatly. But this will be in my next video. I hope to see you in that video. Please subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, and turn on all notifications. Ensure to give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching today's video. Bye.